My daughter-in-law stood in the middle of my own kitchen, pointed her finger directly at my face, and said, "Get a job or get out of our house." My son, Marcus, stood right behind her with his arms crossed over his chest, nodding along like every word coming out of her mouth was absolute truth. And I just stood there in the apron I had worn for 20 years, holding the same wooden spoon I used to stir soup for my family, feeling like a complete stranger in the home I had owned for 32 years. But here is the thing about telling someone to leave a house that already belongs to them. You better make sure your name is actually on the deed. So I took a slow breath, nodded my head, and whispered, "You are absolutely right." The next month, when I raised their rent to $4,500, they finally went digging through their files and pulled out the lease I had written 2 years earlier. And that is when they saw the clause at the bottom of page 3. It read, "Disrespect of landlord results in immediate termination of tenancy and forfeiture of security deposit." Subscribe for more stories and tell me in comments, where are you watching from? My name is Loretta and I am 55 years old. I have lived in the same house in suburban Atlanta for over 3 decades. My late husband, Franklin, and I bought it the year after we got married. Back then, it was nothing special. Just a 4-bedroom colonial with a leaky roof, cracked windows, and a front yard full of weeds. But we saw potential in it. We saw a future. Franklin spent his weekends fixing the plumbing and patching the walls. I painted every single room by hand, choosing the colors carefully because I wanted each space to feel like home. We raised our only son, Marcus, in that house. I watched him take his first steps in the living room. I taught him to ride a bike in the driveway. We threw his high school graduation party in the backyard with streamers and balloons and a cake I baked myself. Franklin passed away 7 years ago. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon in early September. He was outside mowing the lawn, the same thing he had done 100 times before. I was inside making lemonade when I heard the mower go silent. By the time I got outside, he was already gone. Heart attack, no warning, no goodbye. Just there one moment and gone the next. I was devastated in a way I cannot fully describe. Losing him felt like losing a part of myself that I would never get back. Marcus took it hard too. For a while, we leaned on each other. He would come over on weekends to help me with repairs around the house. We would sit together on the porch in the evenings and talk about his father. We shared memories and grief and the slow, painful process of learning to live without Franklin. Those were difficult years, but they brought Marcus and me closer than we had ever been. Then he met Bethany. She was a marketing manager at a tech company downtown. She was confident and ambitious and sharp in a way that impressed people at first glance. Marcus fell for her quickly. They got engaged after a year and married 6 months later. I liked her in the beginning. She seemed to push Marcus to work harder and aim higher. She had big plans for their future, and she made him feel like he could achieve anything. But after the wedding, things started to shift. Bethany began making comments about how often Marcus came to visit me. She complained that he spent too much time helping me with the house. She said I was too dependent on him. She said I needed to learn how to stand on my own 2 feet instead of relying on my son for everything. I tried to brush it off. I told myself she was just protective of their time together, but the comments kept coming, and Marcus stopped visiting as often. 2 years ago, Marcus and Bethany hit a rough patch with their finances. Bethany's company went through layoffs, and she lost her job. Marcus was working as an accountant, but his salary alone was not enough to cover their apartment rent in the city. They were struggling to keep up with bills, and their savings were running out fast. One evening, Marcus called me and asked if they could move in with me for a little while. Just temporarily, he said. Just until they got back on their feet. I said yes without hesitation. They were family. This was what the house was for. I even drew up a simple lease agreement to make everything official. I charged them $800 a month, which was far below what they would pay anywhere else. I included a few clauses to protect myself, things I hoped I would never have to use. One of those clauses, buried near the bottom of page 3, stated that any act of serious disrespect toward the landlord would result in immediate termination of the lease and forfeiture of the security deposit. I added it almost as a joke, a safeguard I never imagined would become necessary. For the first few months, everything seemed fine. Bethany found a new job. Marcus got a small raise at his firm. They started talking about saving up and moving out within a year. I thought we had found a good rhythm. I thought we could make it work. But as time passed, they stopped mentioning their plans to leave. They started redecorating rooms without asking me first. They rearranged furniture and complained about the outdated appliances. They acted like the house belonged to them, and I was just someone who happened to live there too. And slowly, without realizing it at first, I started feeling like a guest in my own home. The comments started slowly, so slowly that I almost did not notice them at first. Little remarks here and there, disguised as jokes or observations. Bethany would walk into the living room while I was watching my evening game shows and sigh loudly. She would glance at the television, then at me, and shake her head like she was disappointed in what she saw. "Must be nice," she said one night, "just sitting around all day with nothing to do. Some of us actually have to earn a living." I smiled politely and told myself she was just tired from work. I told myself she did not mean anything by it. I changed the channel and pretended I had not heard the sharpness in her voice. But the comments did not stop. They got worse. She started criticizing the way I kept the house. She said the curtains in the living room were outdated and made the whole place look old. She complained that the kitchen smelled like whatever I had cooked the night before. She wrinkled her nose at my lavender candles and said they gave her headaches. She made remarks about the way I dressed, the way I spent my mornings reading the newspaper, the way I hummed while I washed the dishes. Every little thing I did seemed to bother her, and Marcus never said a word to stop it. One afternoon, I was folding laundry in the hallway when I overheard them talking in their bedroom. The door was open just a crack, and Bethany's voice carried clearly through the gap. "I do not understand why she is still here," she said. "She does not work. She does not pay any real bills. We are basically supporting her at this point." I stopped folding and stood very still, waiting to hear what Marcus would say. I waited for him to remind her that this was my house, that I had raised him in these rooms, that the rent they paid was a fraction of what it would cost them anywhere else. But all he said was, "I know. It is frustrating." My chest tightened. I set down the shirt I was holding and quietly walked back to my room. I closed the door behind me and sat on the edge of my bed for a long time, staring at the photo of Franklin on my nightstand. I wondered what he would say if he could see what was happening. I wondered if he would even recognize our son anymore. Over the next few weeks, the tension in the house grew thicker. Bethany stopped pretending to be polite. She would walk past me in the hallway without saying good morning. She would leave her dishes in the sink and expect me to wash them. She would schedule dinners with her friends in my dining room without asking, and act annoyed when I came downstairs during their conversations. One night, I made a roast chicken with mashed potatoes and green beans. It was a recipe Franklin had loved, one I had been making for over 30 years. I set the table nicely and called Marcus and Bethany down for dinner. Bethany looked at the plate in front of her and pushed it aside. "I am not eating this," she said flatly. "It is too heavy. I am trying to watch what I eat." I nodded and said I could make her something else if she preferred. She rolled her eyes. "That is not the point, Loretta. The point is that you never ask what we want. You just make whatever you feel like and expect us to be grateful. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but did not say anything. He just stared at his plate, like he was hoping the conversation would end on its own. I did not argue. I cleared the table quietly and went to my room without eating. The final confrontation came about a week later. I was in the kitchen making dinner again, stirring a pot of vegetable soup, when Bethany walked in with Marcus right behind her. She had that look on her face, the one she always wore when she was about to say something cruel. "We need to talk," she said, crossing her arms. "This arrangement is not working anymore. You are not contributing anything to this household. You do not have a job. You do not pay real bills. You just float around this house like a ghost." I set down the wooden spoon and turned to face her. "This is my house, Bethany. I have owned it for over 30 years. She laughed. Actually laughed. Like I had said something ridiculous. "Your house? We are the ones paying rent. We are the ones buying groceries and keeping this place running. You just exist here, Loretta. That is all you do." I looked at Marcus, hoping to see something in his face. Discomfort, guilt, anything. But he just stood there with his arms crossed, nodding along like she was speaking the truth. Bethany stepped closer. "So here is the deal. Get a job and start pulling your weight around here, or get out of our house." The words hit me like a slap. I stood very still for a long moment, looking at my son, searching for the boy I had raised. The boy who used to hug me every morning before school. The boy who told me I was the best mother in the whole world. But that boy was gone. I nodded slowly, my voice barely above a whisper. "You are absolutely right." Then I turned around and walked to my bedroom, leaving the soup to boil over on the stove behind me. I did not sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet sounds of the house settling around me. Every creak of the floorboards reminded me of Franklin. Every shadow on the wall brought back a memory. This was the room where we had whispered our dreams to each other in the dark. This was the room where I had held his hand for the last time, before they took him away. And now my own son's wife had stood in my kitchen and told me to get out, like I was nothing more than an unwanted guest. By the time the sun came up, something inside me had shifted. The hurt was still there, deep and heavy in my chest, but underneath it was something else, something harder, something that had been building for 2 years without me even realizing it. I got out of bed and walked to the small office at the end of the hallway. It used to be Franklin's space, where he kept his files and documents and receipts. I had not touched most of it since he passed, but I knew exactly what I was looking for. I opened the filing cabinet and pulled out the folder labeled Lease Agreement. Inside was the document I had drafted when Marcus and Bethany first moved in. I had written it myself, using a template I found online and adjusting the language to fit our situation. I read through it slowly, line by line, reminding myself of every clause and condition I had included. The rent was set at $800 a month, well below market rate for a house this size in this neighborhood. There was a clause allowing for adjustments based on changes in household circumstances or cost of living. And there, near the bottom of page 3, was the clause I had almost forgotten about, Section 9. It stated clearly that any act of serious disrespect toward the landlord could result in immediate termination of the lease and forfeiture of the security deposit. I read that clause 3 times. Then I closed the folder and sat back in Franklin's old chair. I thought about what Bethany had said, get a job or get out of our house. I thought about the way Marcus had stood there nodding, like I was a problem to be solved. I thought about all the little comments and insults I had swallowed over the past 2 years, the eye rolls, the sighs, the way Bethany talked about me like I was a burden instead of a mother. I had spent my entire life being patient, being kind, being understanding. I had raised Marcus to be respectful and grateful, and somewhere along the way, he had forgotten every lesson I ever taught him. He had chosen his wife over his mother, and he had let her treat me like garbage in my own home. I was done being patient. I picked up my phone and called Theodore. He was an old friend of Franklin's, a lawyer who had helped us with legal matters for over 20 years. He answered on the second ring. "Loretta," he said warmly, "it has been a while. How are you holding up?" I told him everything. I told him about the comments and the insults. I told him about the conversation in the kitchen. I told him what Bethany had said and how Marcus had responded. Theodore listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. "That is unacceptable," he said finally. "You know the lease is airtight, right? You wrote it yourself and I reviewed it. Everything in there is enforceable." "I know," I said. "That is why I am calling." Over the next week, I prepared carefully. I documented every insult I could remember, writing down dates and details in a notebook I kept hidden in my nightstand. I saved text messages where Bethany had complained about me to Marcus. I printed out emails where she had referred to me as a burden. I built a case, piece by piece, like a puzzle coming together. Then I drafted a formal notice of rent increase. I used the clause in the lease that allowed for adjustments based on changes in circumstances. I raised their monthly rent from $800 to $4,500, effective at the start of the following month. It was a steep increase, but it was within my legal rights. Theodore reviewed the notice and confirmed that everything was in order. On a quiet Sunday evening, I slid the notice under their bedroom door. Then I went back to my room and sat on the edge of my bed, waiting. My hands were trembling slightly, not from fear, but from something else. Anticipation, maybe, or relief. For the first time in 2 years, I was not swallowing my pain. I was not pretending everything was fine. I was finally standing up for myself. And whatever happened next, I knew I would face it on my own terms. The explosion came faster than I expected. I was still sitting on the edge of my bed when I heard their bedroom door fly open and slam against the wall. Heavy footsteps pounded down the hallway. Then Bethany's voice cut through the silence like a knife. "Loretta, get out here right now." I stood up slowly, smoothed the front of my blouse, and walked out to meet them. They were standing in the hallway outside my door. Bethany was clutching the rent notice in her hand, her knuckles white from gripping the paper so tightly. Her face was flushed with anger. Marcus stood a few steps behind her, looking confused and uncomfortable, like he was not quite sure what was happening. "What is this?" Bethany demanded, shoving the paper toward my face. $4,500 a month? Are you out of your mind? I kept my voice calm and steady. "It is a rent increase, effective next month. You cannot do this." Her voice was shrill now, echoing off the walls. "We have a lease. You cannot just change the terms whenever you feel like it." I clasped my hands in front of me and looked her directly in the eyes. "Actually, I can. The lease includes a clause that allows for rent adjustments based on changes in household circumstances. I suggest you read it again more carefully." Bethany let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "This is insane. We cannot afford this. You know that. You are trying to force us out. I am exercising my rights as the landlord and owner of this property," I replied. "If the new rent is beyond your means, you are welcome to find housing elsewhere." Marcus finally stepped forward. His face was pale, and his voice came out hesitant and uncertain. "Mom, come on, this is crazy. We are family. You cannot treat us like strangers." I turned to look at my son, the boy I had raised, the boy I had sacrificed everything for. He was standing there looking at me like I was the villain, like I was the one who had done something wrong. Family. I repeated quietly. Is that what we are, Marcus? Because last week your wife stood in my kitchen and told me to get a job or get out of my own house, and you stood right beside her and nodded along like everything she said was true. Marcus opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. He looked at Bethany, then back at me, clearly searching for something to say. Bethany was not finished. She stormed past me into the kitchen, where I had left the original lease agreement sitting on the counter. She grabbed it and started flipping through the pages frantically, scanning each line for something she could use against me. I followed her calmly and stood in the doorway, watching her search. Page 3, I said. Section 9. Her eyes darted to the bottom of the page. I watched her expression shift as she read the words out loud, almost whispering them to herself. Disrespect of landlord results in immediate termination of tenancy and forfeiture of security deposit. She looked up at me, her face a mixture of shock and fury. This is ridiculous. You cannot enforce something like this. It is not even a real legal term. My lawyer disagrees, I replied. He reviewed the lease when I first drafted it, and again last week when I decided to take action. He assured me that every clause is enforceable, including that one. Bethany slammed the lease down on the counter. You planned this. You set us up from the beginning. I shook my head slowly. No, I hoped I would never have to use it. I hoped my son and his wife would treat me with basic respect while living under my roof. But you made it very clear that respect was never part of your plan. Marcus stepped into the kitchen, his hands raised like he was trying to calm a storm. Mom, please, we can work this out. Bethany did not mean what she said. She was just stressed. We all say things we do not mean sometimes. I looked at him for a long moment. I thought about all the times I had made excuses for him. All the times I had told myself he was just caught in the middle. All the times I had hoped he would finally stand up and defend me. You had 2 years to work this out, Marcus. 2 years to tell your wife that this is my home, not hers. 2 years to remind her that I am your mother, not your maid. But you said nothing. You let her treat me like I was invisible, and now you want me to pretend it never happened. I straightened my shoulders and took a deep breath. You have 30 days to vacate the premises. If you choose to fight this, my lawyer is ready. But I should warn you, the documentation I have collected will not reflect well on either of you. Bethany opened her mouth to argue, but I held up my hand. This conversation is over. You know where the door is. Then I turned around and walked back to my bedroom, closing the door softly behind me. Marcus and Bethany moved out 19 days later. They did not wait for the full 30. I think Bethany could not stand being in the house any longer, knowing that I had won. She packed their belongings in a furious rush, slamming drawers and stuffing clothes into suitcases without folding them. Marcus moved quietly, avoiding eye contact with me whenever we passed in the hallway. He looked tired, defeated, like a man who had been caught between 2 storms and had no idea which way to run. They found a small apartment across town. I heard later from a neighbor that the rent was nearly double what they had been paying me, and the space was half the size. They lost their entire security deposit, just as the lease had stated. Bethany tried to contest it. She sent a long, angry email to Theodore, claiming the clause was unfair and unenforceable. Theodore responded with a single paragraph, explaining that the lease had been reviewed and approved, and that any further communication should go through official legal channels. She did not write back. For the first few weeks after they left, the house felt strained, too quiet, too empty. I would walk through the rooms and notice the spaces where their furniture had been, the scuff marks on the floor from Bethany's shoes, the faint smell of her perfume still lingering in the guest bathroom. I had spent 2 years wishing for my home back, and now that I had it, I was not sure what to do with all the silence. Marcus did not call. He did not text. For 3 months I heard nothing from him at all. I knew he was angry. I knew Bethany had probably convinced him that I was the villain in this story. But the silence still hurt more than I expected. He was my only child, my only connection to Franklin, and now it felt like I had lost him too. I kept myself busy. I repainted the guest room in a soft blue color that I had always wanted. I planted new flowers in the front yard. I invited my old friend Dolores over for coffee on Saturday mornings, something I had not done in years because Bethany always complained about guests. Slowly, the house started to feel like mine again, not just a building I lived in, but a home I had reclaimed. About 6 months after they moved out, my phone rang on a Tuesday evening. I looked at the screen and saw Marcus's name. My heart jumped, but I let it ring twice before I answered. Mom. His voice was hesitant. Can we talk? I sat down at the kitchen table and waited for him to continue. He told me that Bethany had left him. She had been having an affair with someone from her office, a man she had been seeing for months. Marcus found out when he came home early one afternoon and saw a message on her phone that she had forgotten to delete. They had a terrible She packed a bag and moved out that same night. The divorce papers arrived 2 weeks later. I listened without interrupting. When he finished, there was a long pause. I am sorry, Marcus, I said finally. That must have been very painful. It was. His voice cracked slightly. But that is not why I called. I called because I owe you an apology. A real one. I did not respond. I just waited. I should have stood up for you, he continued. I knew what she was doing was wrong. I knew she was treating you badly, but I was a coward. I did not want to fight with her, so I just stayed quiet and hoped things would get better on their own. And that was not fair to you. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting his words sink in. No, I said quietly, it was not. I understand if you do not want to see me, Marcus said. I understand if you need more time, but I want you to know that I am sorry and I miss you. I thought about all the nights I had spent alone in this house, wondering if I would ever hear those words. I thought about the anger and the hurt and the long months of silence. And then I thought about Franklin and what he would have wanted me to do. I miss you too, I said. We are talking again now, slowly, carefully. He comes by on weekends sometimes to help with small repairs, the way he used to before Bethany. We sit on the porch together and drink iced tea and talk about ordinary things. We do not pretend that everything is back to normal. We both know it will take time to rebuild what was broken, but we are trying. I am 55 years old, and I spent too many years believing that keeping quiet was the same as keeping peace. I let people treat me poorly because I did not want to cause conflict. I swallowed my pride and my pain because I thought that was what good mothers did. But I learned something important the day I raised that rent. Silence is not peace. And a home is not a home if you are not allowed to feel safe in it. This house is mine. It always was. And I am still standing in it, stronger than before. If you want more stories, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from.